I'd never really been keen on the idea of immigrating to America, no. I was but 21 years old, and my rebellious older brother, Edward, had already left in pursuit of adventure and a new life. He went to New York City, but I'd never see myself living there. I quite enjoyed the life I had in London. Life in the United Kingdom was plentiful, really. I come from a prominent family of doctors. My father proud that I had married a colleague of his. We were set to meet on a blind date, and from what I'd heard, he was very respectable and from a well-to-do family. We were satisfied with what we had in London, and there was no desire to uproot our lives. In truth, from the letters received from my brother, America seemed to provide a lousy life for immigrants. In April of 1918, what began as an influx of patients to my father's office with coughs and sneezes quickly became known as the Spanish flu. I remember the look of fear in his eyes when he realized he'd caught the disease. His initial fever and sore throat quickly transformed into troubling breathing and blood oozing from his nose and mouth, ending with his once handsome face turning blue and then black and lifeless until his death. Within a week of my father's passing, the plague took both my mother and my husband from me. The loss, along with Great Britain fighting against Germany in World War I since August of 1914, left me with no choice but to immigrate to America and join my brother in New York. The remaining funds from my family sufficed to obtain a passport and first-class passage on a 2-week journey to Ellis Island. I was later able to rent a small place near my brother in New York. As I arrived at the port, I noted that many travelers had been waiting from days to months to board their ship due to improper paperwork or uncoordinated arrival schedules. Before my departure, I spent a night in a local private boarding house. Due to the 1893 immigration law, prior to boarding the ship, I was required to answer 31 questions in regard to my identity, status, and affluence. Traveling alone as a woman was not ideal, but my current status and the fact that my brother would be waiting in New York to receive me calmed my fears. The 2-week voyage was not what I would describe as pleasant, but I knew from the smells and the sounds coming from second class, and especially steerage, that my journey was very comfortable compared to theirs. The medical exams conducted at the port were very brief, resulting in much disease. I watched as the steerage passengers were ushered down deep staircases into the confined darkness of the crowded lower decks. Disease spread quickly in those conditions, resulting in the death of many during the nightmarish one-way voyage. I knew relief was in sight once the ship arrived at the entrance to the New York harbor. First and second class passengers were examined and very few were marked as needing any further inspection upon reaching Ellis Island. However, all passengers and steerage accommodations would be examined and questioned upon arrival. I can still recall the exhilaration I felt as Manhattan appeared and the majestic Statue of Liberty came into view, with Ellis Island just ahead. Once docked in port, I immediately began to scan the dock for my brother. Once on the dock, I attempted to take in the chaos going on around me, when suddenly I heard a deep voice calling, "Florence Gray! Florence Gray!" I turned just in time to be swept up in the warm embrace of my spiffy brother, Edward. Startling blue eyes finally in sight, tears streaming down my face as I resolved to begin anew in this place of opportunity. My brother and I discussed what few job prospects might be available to me. Being a wise head, he explained that the initial attraction for early immigrants to America was for the prospect of religious and political freedom, with the possibility of a new life afforded by vast amounts of cheap land, meaning that the majority of people sought farmland or even wanted to find gold. Rapid urbanization and industrialization due to the needed increase in production for war led to labor shortages made worse by men aged 18 to 45 being drafted into service by the Selective Service Act. Fortunately for dames like myself who needed to make a living, when the US reluctantly declared war against Germany, the ensuing wartime economy produced new job opportunities for women. The number of women in traditionally male occupations tripled, and over 1 million women started their first job outside of the home. Although I would certainly receive lower pay than a man and perhaps be ill-regarded by the union, I decided that a factory job would best suit my needs, as they might allow me to fulfill my dream of campaigning for women's rights to vote in America, as I had done back in London. I'd always felt a need for independence within myself, and in London I had busied my days with joining the fight for women's right to vote. The collective force of women in the United Kingdom had enjoyed a victory towards this right when the Representation of the People's Act of 1918 was passed, allowing women over 30 who met certain qualifications the right to vote. Being on my own, I vowed to take up the cause for suffrage upon my arrival to America as well. Although the movement was slowed by World War I, it actually aided in advancing our argument since women had readily stepped in to help the effort. This surely proved us to be patriotic citizens worthy of the right to vote. I immediately lent my voice to the National Women's Party, who had picketed outside the White House gates in support of suffrage since 1917. Being arrested by the fuzz and put in the cooler didn't silence our appeals to President Wilson, who finally addressed the Senate in 1918, requesting the representatives allow women to join the partnership of privilege and right. The 19th Amendment, which prohibited denying the right of U.S. citizens to vote based on sex, was passed by Congress in June of 1919 and subsequently ratified by the states in August of 1920. Just in time for me to cast my vote in the 1920 presidential election. Living through the losses of the Spanish flu, the hardships of World War I, the uncertainty of immigration, and the triumphs of the ratification of the 19th Amendment has formed the strong-willed, independent woman I am today. Being an immigrant and pushing for women's right to vote is, and will always remain, a proud part of my life story.